Hi,
else hear the
everybody.
bird?
What? Oh, yeah. Oh, I
I did hear
definitely
the
heard the
bird.
bird. Uh,
Okay, just making sure
I
I'm not
just,
the only one that heard the bird.
I just thought it was on my end, but there's.
I've been trying to get this bird out all day, and eventually I just had to give up.
Well,
It's
hello,
it
everybody,
entertaining.
and welcome to Ramblemancy. As we begin, as we often do, commenting about the background noises in our own respective locations.
Well, the worst part about it is like I wasn't sure if I was losing my mind or not because I'm like, did anyone else hear that tweeting sound? Like,
Oh,
Oh
that
yeah,
was
sorry,
that
that was
was.
just me tweeting.
oh, okay,
Damn
well,
it,
good.
John.
Okay.
Fucking same brain cell. Anyway, welcome everybody to tonight's episode of Ramblemancy, where we are joined once again by Jake Kile. Jake, thanks for being here.
Hey,
It
thanks
is,
for having me.
yeah, it's so good to have you back. Um, Before we get into tonight's topic, which is dark ttrpg campaigns, um, got a couple of announcements. I think I'm just gonna talk and see what comes out. Let's see what happens.
Mhm.
So, we just fulfilled one of our um, one of the charity fundraiser unlocks that we unlocked through uh, the charity campaign that we did a couple months ago. Yesterday, we did it yesterday. The two lesbians talk about Twilight with Caitlin and Olivia. It was a whole lot of fun. Definitely the most engaged I have ever been producing a stream that I was not on. I was just sitting there like, oh, just like listening to them the
hmm
whole time. It was amazing. So that will be on YouTube eventually. No specific dates on that just yet, but we'll get it there ASAP and we'll let you know as soon as it is. Um, and then this week, I think this week is pretty much just sort of a regular schedule. So we'll get more into that at the end of the stream. I'll let you know a little bit about that. But I will say at the beginning of this stream, because I double confirmed it today, next Ramblemancy, a week from today, we will be joined by a very special guest, never before seen on this channel. That would be one Rick Budd. Rick Budd will be joining us. Yeah,
Hey,
Rick will be
Hey.
coming and talking with us about superheroes, a topic that like I think he like knows some stuff about. I don't know.
maybe,
Like,
I
maybe
guess
just maybe
maybe.
one or two
Hmm.
things about.
yeah, he might know something about that. Anyway,
Hmm.
so Rick will be here next week, chatting with us about that, which I'm very excited about. That I honestly could not wait until the end of the stream to talk about that because I've been sitting on this for several weeks now already.
Even like the lack of knowledge that he has about
Right?
superheroes,
Yeah.
right? Rick Budd is honestly a phenomenal human being,
Yeah.
like just
Mhm.
as a person. So like, I'm super happy that you all are talking to him. Like
Yeah.
legit, one of my favorite people to work with.
Yeah.
Like
Rick
not even a joke.
I believe it. Rick has been on
Mhm.
my on one. I have a list of people that I'm like I just want to sit down and have a conversation with this person, and Rick has been on that list for a long time. So it's yeah, it's really cool that we're finally getting Rick on the channel. Um,
Ramblemancy is such a good way to
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
have an excuse to be like, hey, you just want to hang out and talk for like an
yeah,
hour and a half?
hmm
truly, yeah. Um, So yeah, I think for the most part, everything that we've got going on right now is our usual stuff. So we'll leave most of the specifics of that till the end of the stream, so that for right now we can just get directly into our topic. I saw an Amethyst Cat Lady in the chat. Hello and welcome, Hessen Young. Thank you so much. 11 months subscribed. That is awesome. Congratulations and thank you so much.
Nice. Love that.
JWB, good to see you. Murphy Pop Art, welcome, welcome. It is good to see all of you, and welcome to all of our lurkers who are hanging out back there. We see you and we appreciate you. Um, so, dark campaigns.
No such thing. They're called edgelord campaigns.
Oh
And
God.
Right, I'm sorry. My mistake. Uh,
Oh man.
so yeah, so like Jake, I feel like you have like a few things to say about this
Mhm.
subject.
Look, I have nothing. I've never done it before. I don't know why you all asked me to be here for dark campaigns. It's the weirdest thing ever.
Yeah.
Um,
It's like almost as weird as us asking Rick to come and talk about superheroes.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, like
Just about
why?
equal.
Yeah, why would you, of all the people,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
No, yeah, I mean, I there's so much to talk about.
Gosh, I know.
So one of the key things I would say about dark campaigns is that they are probably one of the more difficult things to do, right? I think that the two most difficult campaigns to run is level 20 campaigns and dark campaigns. Those are the two most difficult things for people to do, because one, when you get to higher levels in any ttrpg that I've ever experienced, I'm sure that like Monster Heart 2 is probably like not one of those ones on there, but like most ttrpgs, when you do high level end game content, it gets so weird and wacky, and it's just such a different game than when you started, because it's just like, oh, I just cast wish because I can, you know. It's like it changes the dynamic of how things work. And then with dark campaigns, it is something that you have to do with people that you trust, because you are going to touch on topics and you're going to do things and say things as a GM that are not good things. And your players have to kind of go along with it, you know, and making sure that you're playing with people that you trust and people that you have a very good means of communication with. Like those are like the key aspects.
Yeah, I think so. I also think it's interesting because like we intentionally kept like the premise of this vague with that's why we use the word dark camp, because that could be dark in terms of evil, dark in terms of tone, dark in terms of, I mean, basically anything. So like that's kind of like any of that is fair game here. So like I know like for myself recently, one of the things that I've been doing is I used to hate, like truly hate with a capital H, grimdark fantasy, right?
Sure.
But recently I've actually found myself making a distinction that I hadn't before, which is the difference between grimdark settings
Sure.
and grimdark stories.
Yeah.
And that's an important difference, because I found that I am in love with grimdark settings. I think they're fascinating. You can tell such a wealth of interesting stories within this like just dark, bleak setting, and it contrasts with sort of stories of a more hopeful bent, like I generally tend to prefer telling.
Sure.
It contrasts with that very nicely. It creates a really cool interplay between those things. I find grimdark stories horrifying because they are often, not always, I'm sure there are good ones, but they are often riddled with lazy shortcuts, like using some pretty not great things like sexual assault and like blood and gore and that kind of stuff. And like those are, I think, lazy shortcuts that are problematic and just don't need to do that. So holy crap, friends who roll dice, hello, welcome.
Welcome, Raiders.
Hello.
Hey,
welcome. Good to see you.
I mean, friends who roll dice. I mean, speaking of dark campaigns, one of the people that run friends that roll dice is in one of my dark campaigns.
That's right. Yeah.
Cool. Drax is actually in my evil setting, because you were talking about the two different things. So I have two different dark campaigns that I run. One is Court of Corvids, which is the good guys going out and defeating the bad and whatnot. The Parliament of Owls, which is what Drax is in, is my main characters are evil. They are evil characters. They have their own evil motives and they do their own evil things. And like and they're in the same world. They have not crossed yet, but there are definitely connections between the two games. And they're tonally very, very different, but they are all within the same kind of dark realm. And so like you were talking about, like a dark campaign can mean a lot of different things. And I agree. Like in my campaign with Court of Corvids, my players bring the light and I am the dark. And that's how that works in that system. Is literally every single character in that game. I do a massive amount of research about every single villain, which is probably not like healthy for me, but you know, Because every single major villain in that game is based off of a real life cult leader or serial killer, or sometimes like the end of the last campaign, the last thing that they had to deal with was based off of an exorcism that existed. It like as real as you want to think about exorcism, that is a personal choice. You can believe it or not, but but these serial killers and these cult leaders are real people. They were real people and they hurt real people. And so whenever I do a campaign based off of that person, I literally dive deep into who that person was and try to build a character based off of that. Like a lot of people love like, oh, I built Batman in D&D. Like this is very much like that, but it's like, okay, what kind of character would Jim Jones be? You know, like what class would Jim Jones be, and what is his subclass, and what are some of the abilities Jim Jones would have? And surprisingly, there are no Kool-Aid based spells in Pathfinder Second Edition.
Weird. That seems like such a bizarre oversight.
Staggering oversight.
You know, the funny enough, I actually want to clarify, it wasn't Kool-Aid, it was Flavor Aid, but that's a completely different story.
See, this is the kind of stuff that like when someone hands you a story as an editor and they get like they tell you like they spend like 3 pages talking about how it was Flavor Aid and not Kool-Aid. You're like, I love this research that you did. That's really cool. It will bore the hell out of your
So this isn't really dark, but there was a period of time in which I super got into mining. I'm not like Bitcoin mining, but like like people going into the mountains and extracting ore from it. And I literally had an entire section of our story where they went through mines and accurate builds of how mines are actually like, not just like here you're going, there's a tunnel to the left and to the right. It's like, no, why is that tunnel to the left? That tunnel to the left is going to a very specific place, and like literally mapped out a mine and how they work. And it was funny because we actually had some people in chat who were like, I grew up in a mining town and my family are miners, and this is really accurate. Like, I was like, yes. But I put that kind of detail into my villains. And so like the idea is that like the first arc, and the reason I keep going back to Jim Jones is because he was kind of like an early on villain. So it's not like recent spoilers. This is like spoilers from a while ago. But I put a lot of effort into Jim Jones and how his who he is could tell a larger story. And I try to, at the end of each arc, when they inevitably defeat the enemy, is to take a moment at the end of the show and kind of give some levity to what has happened, and like that these are real people and that this person did murder a bunch of people. And we've done that multiple times when it's come to like serious topics of who they're based off of. And it's I think it's really important to not just use it as a not monetary, because it's not like we make money doing this, but not just like an entertainment. It's also important to be like, hey, yes, this is a real thing. People were hurt by this, like, you know. But that's one setting. The other setting is my players bring the dark and I try to bring the light. And those two things are very, very different, because they are playing as dark as they possibly can, and I'm trying to help them fill their backstory and give them reason for why they're the way that they are, which also means that I have to be bad to them. So Liv, which I don't, you've all played with Liv, right?
I'm going to be playing with Liv, but okay. we know each other. We talk a lot, so yeah.
So spoilers. We did a series of one-shots with each of the players for Parliament of Owls. So we did an entire season, and then I have done one episode for each player where we go into their backstory, and it's just me and the player. Mm-hmm. And so Liv is the only episode that has aired. And Liv and I kind of talked a little bit about how she wanted to be and how her character is. I know, and I want to say most of the players kind of struggle with like being bad, because it's like we're not naturally bad people, so it's kind of hard. But so I kind of took what she had given me and I gave her a really good reason to be mean. So her character is a witch. She is playing that's the subclass of not the subclass, but that's the class.
Right.
And so what I did is I killed her 4 times. We went back in time and we made her relive previous lives of other witches.
Huh.
And she went through and lived through the lives of witches that were killed and tortured by people, by NPCs basically. And so we took that and Liv played each one of these characters and had to live through the last moments of their life up until hey, you're back.
Dude, stream's
That was
haunted
a
tonight.
really.
The stream's haunted.
That was really. It's yes. It's in theme. It's keeping with the theme.
Yeah.
It was really spooky because what happened was, Jake, your voice was roboting.
Uh-huh.
And I didn't even realize, because that's never happened before. But obviously, what happened was the call dropped, but the internet's fine. But your voice was just roboting super hard. Obviously, it was on my end. That was spooky. I'm in it now.
There you go.
But
that was actually the transition point into the Matrix.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, so basically I gave Liv the motivation of having to live through people not treating her directly bad, but treating who she had become poorly. And so she lived through the life of people hunting her down just for being a witch, and why there's a coven, why witches stick together, and why their general distaste for non-witches exist. And that was kind of the episode that we did with her. Now, I do this with each one of the players and basically have to give them the opportunity to go through something terrible is really what I should say. And so the key thing is that, one, these are people that I've talked to, and I'm repeating what I said in the very beginning, is we have talked about this and went through this they didn't know what they were going through, but I made sure that, hey, we're going to go through dark things. What are where are your lines? Where are your soft lines? Like, this is a very key thing that is very, very important for people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think I mean, those kinds of things are so useful. Like, safety tools are important in any game, but I think especially so in darker games, like, whether that's horror or just sort of like a darker fantasy, like, it's especially necessary in those kinds of things. And I as you were talking, I honestly, I couldn't help thinking, like, wow, for something like this, I think there's a fair number of people out there who, like, do everything in their power to make sure that their games are safe and that everybody is having a good time. But I worry sometimes that there are people who take away from the conversation. Oh, we do lines and veils and we're good to go. But like you have to have those conversations. Like, you have to have those conversations with people
and checking in on each other.
Yes.
Like, there has been episodes where at the end, or like it's like, hey, are you okay? I know that was extreme. That was particularly heavy for you. Are you okay? Is there anything that you would like to do or change about that? Is there, it's like going back and making sure that you're having those conversations, and because the thing is that, and not just in the moment too, like going back to those conversations later on. There was a very particular episode where a lot of things happened, and I checked with the player afterwards. They were good. And then like a week or two later, it's like, hey, just want to make sure that you're good, because like in the moment you don't want to, it's very difficult because you don't want to like ruin the momentum. Right. You know what I mean? And you as a player or you as a GM, like sometimes you'll just be like, no, it's fine. Keep going. But then like weeks later, you're just like, no, you know what? I don't like that.
And you know what? That this and like Infinite Horizon isn't even like a dark. I mean, like, it has its dark moments, but it's like primarily like it's firmly sits in the genre of like hope punk. But even within that, there was a moment, and like I'm not going to go into any specifics about it because that's not the kind of behind the scenes that I like giving people. But there was definitely a moment this season in Infinite Horizon, where something that a player and I had specifically talked about, that I checked in multiple times before it happened. I was like, is this okay with you? Is this something that is going to be like good? And if not, that's completely fine. This doesn't have to happen. And we like talked through it several times, and then it happened. The day came, it happened in the moment, and like afterwards, the player came back to me and was like, hey, so yeah, I thought I was going to be fine with it, but it wasn't great. And I was like, okay, cool. Well, then it's fine. Here's how we'll fix it going forward. And this is, and that was, yeah, it was a good thing to have had that conversation, because then it was in that moment, it wasn't me, the GM, crossing anybody's boundaries in any way that like was just unprompted. It was, we firmly checked in, made sure it was fine. And then when it turned out it wasn't, it was super easy to just go, hey, okay, cool. That's fine. Here's how we'll just head this off at the pass like right now, and we won't have to deal with this again. And so, yeah, like that was.
And the key thing is to also do those check-ins with not things that are on the list.
Yeah.
Like, especially because it's like, I understand that not everyone can read and understand a lot of social cues, but I feel like most people understand that certain topics are difficult for people to talk about or deal with. Death of your own personal death is definitely one of those things that not everyone is okay with. Or being manipulated, right? It's like, yeah, that's not on your list, but now that we have gone through that, we've done that. How are you doing? You still happy with that? Are you still okay with, not happy? Happy's not the right term, but are you still good with that? What we had done, are you fine with that? And so it's definitely a lot of safety. And I don't think, I'll be honest, I don't think most people are up to it. Like, I don't think most people are. I think a lot of people that want to go into the grim dark / like evil are more people that are like, look, yeah, I'm gonna just be super messed up and I'm just gonna do all these really like no, please don't
take it too far.
Yeah. If that's you and you're not willing to take the steps necessary to make sure that people are going to be okay, just don't do it. Just do not do it. Oh
God. And then like, so go ahead, Freeman, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and plus it doesn't take a whole lot to make it a grimdark setting, if I'm not mistaken. You don't have to do really obscene things to make it dark. You could just have very subtle things like, Lucas, you use this in our home game. The crops are going bad, so health potions are like on low supply. I mean, that was probably not your intention, because it's not that's not a grimdark setting or a dark setting, but that's something that could alter everything just slightly. Health potions are scarce because of this.
It definitely adds a certain degree of like desperation to some of like the situations you might find yourself in. Yeah. So I actually hadn't even thought about that. That's a really good point. Yeah.
I thought about that earlier today. I was like, that was so smart of Lucas. Damn.
I promise you that there was not a whole lot of deep thought that went into that decision. It was just like, how can I make things harder for this?
Yeah.
Well, and I will say specifically, Lucas, you mentioned this, that like you don't like gore, right? I mean it
not like,
but
like gore
that,
porn kind of stuff. Like that kind of.
So I do enjoy gore. Like I watch horror films, like I watch slasher films, like I'm that dude, like, right? But I know that that's not everyone's cup of tea, and it really shouldn't be, like, but like I will sprinkle descriptions into games where I use it as not necessarily a shock factor, but a means in which to understand how bad the situation is. And I think that's kind of, and I mean, I'm saying this like, oh, I'm so smart about this, but in reality, it's like, I do this in a means of like, I want the players to understand that this is not just like a vampire who's got 2 little bite holes in their neck.
Yeah.
Oh no, it's like they are ripping, like I'm not gonna describe
some Castlevania level of like
yeah. Like I will put in my favorite word, viscera. You know what I mean? Like that is one of my favorite words, and I will use that as a term, but it's funny because you were talking about the things that you like and what you don't like. And I think it's interesting because like some of the things I like, you don't like, and some of the things that you like, I don't like. Like one of the things that I try to not use, and I'm not saying that you use this, is I don't like my players to feel completely hopeless.
Yeah.
And that's one of the problems I dislike about grimdark like settings, like existence, is the fact of like there has only been one video game I've ever stopped playing because I just couldn't handle it, and it was called Plague's Tale.
Yeah.
That game is fucking rough.
Yeah.
Plague's Tale is an emotional just beat down. It's not even a roller coaster. If it's got ups, I'm cool with it. I'm cool with games that have like ups in them. It has fun moments, and I think that there's a balance in these grimdark games and worlds that have these up moments. That game, it was good. It was beautiful. The gameplay was good. It was simple. It was understandable, and it was engaging. I just couldn't deal with the constant barrage of just emotional being beat.
Yep.
And I think that that's kind of important to, at least for games that I like, to not have that. Having moments of like defeat, I think, are important, but having those moments of fun and excitement. Like an example, we have Charles Manson is in Court of Corvids. And after doing a bunch of research on Charles Manson, I realized Charles Manson's kind of a bitch. And so Charles Manson literally is just this strung out dude that's just like, hey guys, would you just totally do this thing? Like, and like Charles Manson made some horrible things happen, but having it be a little bit lighter in the situation makes the game more enjoyable.
Yeah.
Like I come to the game to play tabletop RPG, or to the table to play games for a lot of reasons. Hold on, there we got the sentence.
The train took a little longer to get to the station, but we got there.
Yeah, but like I tend to like shy away from absolutely defeats, but like I tend to shy away from like just absolute despondency when it comes to like being either a player or GMing. Like that's not like a feeling that I think is super fun for anybody, or like a tone that I really like. Like I always want there to be like a point or a purpose to like whatever we're feeling, right?
Well,
so if we're having a low, let's make something of this, as opposed to like just kind of wallowing in it, which I think is what a lot of at least media in this genre I think does. And they're like,
say.
Look how like sad and hopeless this is, and I'm like, okay, but
so what? Yeah.
Yeah,
That's what I was going to say.
What are we going to do with this?
Especially in tabletop games, what I've found is that you can create a whole lot of tone. You can get a lot of mileage out of just doing the really bad thing one time. You do it once. Like what you said, John, like having those like hopeless moments of defeat or whatever. If you can orchestrate it in a good way, in a way that like isn't just totally like defeat the players or whatever, right? Like emotionally, spiritually, however you want to, right?
Mm-hmm.
That moment, you can get a lot of mileage out of that. You don't ever have to do that again because it sets the tone. Mm-hmm. You don't ever have to do it again. You can get a lot of mileage out of just one time of doing something like that without having to constantly rub players into like this sort of hopeless place. And yeah.
That reminds me of a really good time in Court of Corvids. The players were captured and they were imprisoned, and while they were there, they were like, "Oh, I'm gonna be a smartass. Like, screw this guard. What's the guard going to do?" You know, like every player is like, "I am the PC here.
Yep.
Okay, I will do what I want." And so, I literally made their life a living hell and almost killed them all. Like, they were in a prison, and this is, you know, a fantasy world, you know, so they were in these bars, but the ground was all hay because that's where people use the restroom in jail. And the guard, they were being a pain in the ass to the guard, and the guard's like, I'll just light the hay on fire. Like, I have no problem losing you or anyone in here. And they're like, oh yeah, you won't do it. And I put the candle up on the thing and they're like, oh yeah, you're not going to do it. And then I pushed it over. And that set a tone. And I have yet to have to do that ever again, because it was like, you know what? You came, you found out. I think the word is fuck around and find out.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, you fucked around and you found out.
And here it is.
And like, doing that in the world, you only have to do it once, right? Because then it's like, we understand what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And there has, and I will tell you, running a dark campaign is extremely difficult. There was definitely a very key moment in Court of Corvids where between miscommunication and just a low point in the story, like, it was very difficult. We all had to sit down and have a group meeting about where we were, how the players were feeling, and everything. Because there was a point in which, like, they had spent like 2 seasons gathering these really important artifacts, and then they go to this last place to get the last piece, this last artifact. And before, it was just like, kill this person, defeat this person, blah blah blah. Well, this last piece was, you can take this piece, but you're going to be hurting a lot of people because they're using it to keep themselves alive. And your option. And so it was just like, yeah, you can take this, and you've done 2 entire seasons up to this point, and this is supposed to be a real high moment, you getting that last piece to be able to defeat the big bad. And then you find out that if you take it away, you're going to be hurting a lot. And I spent 3 episodes of them getting to know the people before they found out. So they like
twisting the knife. Yeah.
So they got to meet the people. They got to have emotional connections. They got to talk to them and be a part of their community for a few days. Of course, I added intrigue and stuff like that of them, like, oh, the backstabbing and blah, 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 blah. But like, when it came down to it was, yeah, this is your goal, is to get this piece no matter what the consequence is. But your choice right now is to get this piece and hurt all of these people that you just spent all this time getting to know and care about. And it was just like, at the end of the episode, they were just like, fuck, like, and they were like, oh, I've got this huge plan, I want to do this. And I was like, they're not going to let you do that. Like, they're not. That's just, I was like, if you were in that situation and someone said, hey, can I have your food for the next year? Like, what would you do? Like, strangers that you just met, would you really do that? And they're just like, no. And I'm like, I'm trying to go about it. And they're like, and so like, there was an entire like behind the scenes conversation, and we got it situated, and everyone came to understand. And I gave a little bit of what was going forward, because it was important to make sure that they knew that I wasn't trying to hurt them. Like that I'm creating these low points for a reason, like you said. And story wise, they ended up working with them. And while not taking it away from them, they have had to hold off on their end goal and do more research and try to get more information to try and make both of these things happen. And so it's been this kind of like emotional roller coaster for all of them, because it was rough, I will tell you.
It's interesting though. It's so interesting because like having that kind of like very like rough sort of like dark like decision that they have to make here is interesting, I think, because it helps illustrate the line between like hero and villain, because like the villainous choice there, I think, is to just take it, like is just take it, and like what I have to do is more important than all of you.
Well, exactly. And I think that's where I like to sit on the realm of like with dark storytelling. And this kind of gets back into like what we were talking about earlier, right? What kind of bridging the gap between what you just said, John, and between like what we were talking about earlier about like the types of stories that you tell in like in dark campaigns, which is I think kind of goes to your point, Jake, about not going totally hopeless all the time, right? Which is that I think personally, my opinion about like the way that good dark storytelling is done in TTRPGs is getting the players to examine where they stand on like that sort of morality spectrum, not pushing them in either direction, but getting them to like stop and think about it for a second. And however they engage with it is correct. Like however they choose to go, that's correct, because that's the nature of dark storytelling. The thing that I like about a dark setting or a dark story is that it gives the opportunity to go really dark without forcing that, because at any time a player can absolutely just choose to say, I know the world is dark and terrible, but I'm not going to be, right? And I think that is interesting. Whereas in like a high like heroic campaign, I mean, it's in the name, like it's a heroic campaign. You can't go, I mean, you can like flirt with dark storytelling there, but like it's in the name. It's a heroic.
It's just like all part of like Joseph Campbell's Hero with a Thousand Faces, like
Yeah.
the wheel, or like the hero's journey thing. There's always the flirting with darkness phase of any heroic story.
Yeah.
And that's not getting into, of course, the villain's tridecagon.
Well, and so that's what we've been talking very heavily of Court of Corvids and like how darkness works in that. With Parliament of Owls, like these are players who literally a witch went to them and said, hey, look, I'll give you this super powerful item, but I want souls, so I will give you this item and you need to collect, I think it was like 100 souls, so you need to kill 100 innocent people and you will get this free item. And the players literally went to a town and just started slaughtering the characters, right? Because they're evil. That's what they're there for, right? Like, but them doing that, I have to, me as the GM, add like levity to the situation. And we made it a spa episode.
Perfect.
I love that.
Uh-huh.
So while they're in the midst of their killing spree, like most of the people escape as soon as they start murdering people. And then they're like, hey, is there like a place that we can go to? I'm like, there's a spa. And then they spend the remainder of the episode in the spa having what I think is important person, non-combative, because I think overarching stories, no matter if it's good, bad, or what, I think the most important parts are those moments where players get to be players and get to have those intimate moments with each other. And as a GM, and I think most GMs will agree, getting to sit back and watch your players play is the fucking best part about running a game. And so I try to make sure that that's happening, right? And so it's like I put them in a situation, gave them the opportunity to sit there and talk about their past and talk about who they are and why they are the way that they are. Them being in hot tubs meant that Drax's character had to, like, he's covered in these bandages. He pulls these bandages off and there's mouths and eyes and different like parts of him are like all over that he bandages up. And so it became a topic of conversation because none of the other players had really seen this before. And so they're just like, what? Why is that? And so it's like, hey, my players are killing the town. Cool. Here's a spa time to have this, you as the GM have to give those moments to the players to feel both hopeless and excitement. And depending on which kind of dark tale you're telling, it very much changes what kind of GM you have to be at that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is so drastically different between the two campaigns. And I love both of them equally. Like, I've gotten to do a lot of things that I couldn't do on Court of Corvids in Parliament of Owls. And I absolutely love that. At the same time, I also get to use my unneeded knowledge of true crime.
I was going to say earlier, I feel like true crime shows are part of your research.
Yeah, documentaries, true crime, a lot of reading. Because the thing is like at the end of the day, it's like you're still taking real people and putting them in a fantasy world, and like there's no one-to-one. You know what I mean? Like there isn't, like one of the villains was Asahar, um which was a cult leader who bombed Japan. He had his cult go out to a bunch of places with trash bags full of gas, like full of liquids and stuff like that, and then puncture them, and it made a whole bunch of people sick and die. And it's actually one of the reasons why Japan doesn't have trash cans, trash receptacles, is because of this. It's something that they still deal with even today. But Asahar in our game was a cat folk. Like that's not a 1-to-1 ratio. You know what I mean? But like it made the most amount of sense based off of the fact that he was using yoga as a means to grow a cult.
Yeah.
Oh my god. Well, like, I feel like that's something that TTRPGs can offer too, is like when you want, if you can use sort of dark games or dark settings to kind of examine horrible things that have happened in real life, because they offer like that layer of separation from it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And that's why we have those moments like at the end of arcs where it's just like, this is who this person was. These are people. This is how many people were hurt from this. This is how many people died from this. This is a real real thing. Like it's because it's like, I don't want to use these things disrespectfully. Right. And so the thing is, because I'm pulling from real world situations, I think it's also important to be like, okay, now that we have spent the last, 15 episodes dealing with this, and we've always had this layer of separation, me as a GM and me as a person I'm going to destroy that for a moment, and we're going to break the fourth wall, and we're going to take a moment, and we're going to have a moment of silence and reflect on this, and I don't say that everyone should do that. It's dependent on your table, but the reason I do it is because I'm using these real life situations for a stream.
Mm-hmm.
If it was my home game, I wouldn't, but it's highlighting things that people may not necessarily know. Like I doubt a lot of people even know about Asahar. You know what I mean? Like it's especially here in the US, like how many people are looking up Japanese cult leaders? Like,
yeah. Well, and that's interesting. So, like, a thing that, as we're talking, is sort of surfacing here that I think is interesting is, so, like, you're talking about like how one of the ways that you do the dark sort of storylines in your games is by bringing in real things from real life into those games, like the people, like bad people from real life, and kind of bringing them into the game. And so like that's interesting, because that's actually, as you've been talking about that, I've just been sitting here going like, that's so interesting, because like that is not an approach that ever probably would have occurred to me. So like it's fascinating to me, because so like, but then that started getting me thinking like, what are like other ways of bringing that same sort of like dark tone into the game. And I was thinking about this recently because I'm actually having my first experience of running like a long-term dark sort of game in sort of like a grim dark setting. The story itself isn't, because that's just not the characters the players made, and it's not the stories that they felt they wanted to tell. So that's kind of where we went. But as far as the setting goes, one of the things that I was very careful to think about is the role of magic in the world, right? And so magic being treated as something that people are afraid of and suspicious of and treat with a level of superstition, right? And I was worried going into it that the players would see that and go, oh, well, we better not play casters. And in fact, the opposite thing happened, which is good, because that's what I was hoping for. I was hoping that was going to happen.
I learned a long time ago that as a GM, I don't put restrictions on my players, because inevitably, if I put restrictions on my players, they're going to come back with those things. Like I very remember going and having a GM be like, Dragonborn are extremely rare. Like they don't really happen. Magic is very low. And I want to say 3 out of the 4 players were like, I'm a Dragonborn sorcerer.
Yeah.
But it's like you're drawn to it, right? You're like it's a piece of like very specific information that you're given. You're like, okay, so there's this trope about the world. There's something that's, you know, unusual or unique about this world. Now, how can I play into this?
And so specifically, so here's an interesting thing, right? Where like you can kind of see how that would go, right? Like how the role that magic plays in the world, especially with D&D, being that most of the classes in some capacity or other use magic, right? So you can see how that would automatically make the world a little darker, right? Because the way that the world will then be receiving the player characters has now changed. However, the most interesting part about this is how that then translated back into something in the mundane part of the game. So, like, you've got all the different ways that people get their magic, right? Wizards, pretty rare because they, you know, they don't have the texts that they need to study. They don't have access to those things. Sorcerers are either born or they're made from very rare interactions with magical phenomena. Warlocks, who even knows how to contact, like, some powerful entity to get powers from, right? And I went through, like, all the list of things. Clerics are acceptable, kind of, because, you know, gods and deities and all that kind of stuff. And people are like, all right, you're cool. But then I got to bards, and I was like, that's very interesting, because bards, like, they channel their magic through their performance, through whatever that might be. But then I realized the average layperson would not be able to tell the difference between a bard with magic and just a guy with a lute. And I was like, that has very horrifying implications for how people perceive like the relationship of like the average layperson with music and performance. And I'm like, that's dark. That is dark. You made a world where it's just literally just footloose. The D&D world is what just happened, essentially, right?
And like, if you have a whole bunch of people who are set, like who just at a baseline mistrust traveling musicians or musicians in general, like that's so gritty.
Yeah.
And it's a very quiet. As somebody who is a musician, I'm like, oh, that's a very quiet world. Oh,
yeah, and that's the thing. Like, it's very likely that I am projecting here as to the how dark that actually makes the world, because I also am a musician. So, like, for me, that's like, ooh, not great.
Yeah, but I'm not a musician. But like, imagine, because the thing is like, you mentioned Footloose, but just like the fact is that if there isn't music because it might be magical, right? Then like what other aspects does that affect? Because art is very fluid as a whole. Like the thing is that how is a lack of music affecting painting? How is it affecting art as a whole? Like, is street art still a thing? Like there is just a lot of other things that it affects in the world as a whole, because they're so intertwined with each other. Yeah, it's funny because we're all talking about fantasy, right? But I think it's important that you look at like dark as a whole. I feel it is one of the few things that can go across a lot of things, but have very niche places that they live. Like vampire, like it is rare that you don't have a grim, dark, effed up vampire, right?
Yeah.
Like 99% of vampire shows are, I'm a vampire. I hate that I have to feed, but it's only where I live. Like that right there. The fact is that in Vampire the Masquerade, there is a mechanic built in to make things dark. The fact is that you have to feed off of people. The fact is that the game literally is just like, you could increasingly get more and more hungry as you go, and when you use your abilities. And so it makes it like using magic as a whole. Like imagine if your caster, your wizard, not just read from a book, but had to physically harm someone else to make it happen, right? Like that's messed up. Like that's real, like that automatically puts darkness in that world. someone sent me this setting. I don't know who it is. I'm currently trying to figure out who did, because they sent it to me as a gift on Amazon to our PO box, which I very much appreciate. But like, they sent me this book, and it is a Pathfinder second edition settings book, right? But it is based in the 1920s. And like guns are a thing.
Oh, interesting.
And like magic is very like Lovecraftian, Cthulhu-esque. Like, I haven't even gotten all the way through this book, but like, this game is built to be dark. Like, this game is not like happy-go-lucky, you know. Hey, how's it going, you know? Like, and so I feel like, I think the best one that doesn't get used enough is sci-fi for dark. I love sci-fi for dark, but I feel that like a lot of people kind of avoid it.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons for me personally, I think I may be able to speak to that a little bit, because for me personally, what I've found is that a lot of the media that I engaged with that was like sort of very hardcore sci-fi or whatever really leaned into not necessarily dark in the same way that you would say, oh, dark fantasy, but not like quite in the same way, but more in the like Game of Thrones grim politics kind of way. Right? And that's what I often saw. So when I hear somebody talk about like grim or grim dark sci-fi, I'm immediately already, my brain is just like, okay, this is gonna be some like messed up dystopian bullshit. Like, this is, and which is why I tend, when I do the whole like dark sci-fi, that's why I tend to lean into the realm of like cosmic horror.
Sure.
Because I think that to me is a more interesting, right? When the dark aspects of the setting are in some way supernatural or just unfathomable, right? That I think is interesting. It's more palatable to me as a consumer of media than like doing the hardcore gritty politics kind of stuff where everybody's just backstabbing and fucking everybody over.
I'm not a politics person. Like, well, in real life, I'm very much a politics person. But when I'm playing my fantasy games, I really don't want to deal with politics. But I think that it would be very easy to put horror and grimdark as a whole in sci-fi, like, because the idea of it, not even going politics wise, but just like the idea that you're in a ship that a single crack can kill you, that all of the air that you breathe can go away. The fact is that you have to stop for food. You have to constantly maintain fuel so that you're not stuck. And I feel that a lot of fantasy kind of ignores that aspect of it, because it's like, when you think fantasy, you're like, and if you're thinking like realistic fantasy, you're like, okay, travel days, how long you're traveling, resources for eating, water. But when you're thinking sci-fi, it's like, oh, well, replicators. It's like, no. Food's going to be a definite resource that people are going to be like leaning on. Like, you have to get enough food. Oh, you've done 3 days where you've been eating food paste and it's just starting to get to you. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's like something that people could really dig into.
That's so true. That's such a good approach to that. Yeah. Like, I love that idea. And like, that is something that I remember thinking about some part, like specifically, not so much about like the food and that kind of stuff, but specifically the part about space is terrifying, like, and travel through it is just horrible, right? And I remember thinking about some of that going into Infinite Horizon. I think we like briefly played with a little bit of it in some place, but it didn't really seem to land that well. So I just said, fuck it, whatever. We're not going to deal with that. I just sort of brushed it aside. But I agree, that kind of thing, those kinds of considerations are fascinating. And I think that might be where you start leaning into like, oh god, what I just had the term in my hard sci-fi, right? Hard sci-fi, where you focus a lot more on like the realities of travel. Like, I think we can all agree that Star Wars' space travel is basically just magic. It's like a step down from magic.
Because like light speed and traveling like really, really fast through space in reality is so dangerous. Like literally the tiniest little speck of a rock could just shatter your ship into pieces if you're going that fast. Like, anyway, sorry.
No,
Keep
truly.
going.
Well, I just like I'm just thinking back to like, you know, watching and reading and seeing stuff about like NASA and the International Space Station and everything else, and they're like, yeah, no, like it's actually more dangerous for tiny little dust particles to hit the station than it is for like a big something to hit the station.
Yeah, because you can
they're
do the
bullets.
trajectory. Yeah, you can do the trajectory of like space debris, right? And you're like, oh, that car-shaped satellite that's flying through space. Yeah, we can avoid that because we can measure that. But when it's specks of dust and you're just like, oh, fucking please don't be a bullet through my ship. Like, you know, like but even if you don't go that reality, like even if you don't like travel works, but like if you look at it and you're just like, okay, you need to travel very long distance. You have to get to a very far away place that you're not sure.
Nothing in between.
Yeah. And so it's just like you can play with the idea of like just days upon days upon days of just being in a room with the same people. And like after COVID, and as a lot of people are still going through it, a lot of people are feeling that part heavy. So you might not want to do that just yet.
Yeah, maybe save that. Maybe like hold off on a couple of years, like a few years.
Yeah. But the idea of like going, okay, you've got enough fuel and you can store enough fuel to get there. And you don't know if you're going to be able to get back, because in the reality of like our space travel that we know of, like we're talking about going to Mars, but the thing is that the people that are talking about going to Mars are people that are going to die on Mars.
Yeah.
Like that is not an aspect that a lot of people talk about. And the thing is like you might be going on a mission where you don't know if you're going to be able to get back.
Yeah.
And like making that a part of your story of like, we have discovered the thing that has been sending radio waves to our planet, that has been disrupting and has been killing people, but it is such a distance away that we have no guaranteed way back. And that's just like, or like the idea of being like, we can send a secondary ship to get out to you with fuel, but it will take so long that you have to go out there and survive on this planet with minimal resources.
Jake,
you know what I mean?
Jake,
like these
Jake,
are some really
you're making me really want to run this game now.
I know.
I do not have the time, and you need to stop.
I've just been sitting here thinking like, man, I really want to run a spacefaring game that's just a little bit gritty. Like
especially if you take that and you just inject just a tiny little bit of cosmic horror on the other end, right? Because like there's no help is coming. No help is coming. I mean, it is, but you're gonna be like viscera by then. Like
So right now, we are currently pre-recording a bunch of episodes of Alien, but it's the Colonial Space Marine expansion.
Right. Yep.
Which like is very like I feel like that very much fits that kind of idea because it's like and the GM continuously jokes that stress is more dangerous than the xenomorphs. Because like the way that game works is it's stress based. And so like as you get more and more stress, the more and more dice that you're rolling that have a chance of having like a critical failure. It's very similar to kind of how like vampire works, with like blood dice. Well, you have stress dice kind of. And so like it's really rough, and it's just like going through that and adding that little bit of cosmic horror with aliens, I think is like a really good kind of like, it lives in that realm. But I mean, I'm a huge fan of cosmic horror as a whole. So, I'm also, give me any of it.
I am also truly like, I haven't played many games or any actually like this, but I am a real sucker for the cumulative consequence meter, right? Like I love that kind of mechanic in a game. Cypher can have that, but it's not really built in. It's sort of a thing that I think Stars or Fire has it with like the red line maneuvers and that kind of stuff, but otherwise it's not like really in it. You can add it in, but
I love a big red button that says you can only do this once, and then next to it there's a piece of scotch tape that has unless ... written on it.
Yeah.
So okay, so here's the thing. Here's the thing is you said that you don't have the time to run it. What if I ran it?
I'm in.
I'm in.
Yes, 100%.
Hell
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely.
All right. Well, we'll have to figure out some time to make that happen. But I'm down because I haven't ran a bunch of I haven't ran enough sci-fi things, and I really do love sci-fi, but I've kind of been just like in the fantasy realm because Pathfinder Second Edition is kind of the biggest last game that came out, and we started Game Gorgon, which was highly successful, and we live in the world of like your success is what kills you, which is like we gained a lot of success from Pathfinder Second Edition, and while we love it and still love it, it is still one of those things of like, okay, I still need to do content for this because that's where a lot of people found us, and a lot of people like us because of that.
Right.
So while we do branch out and do other things, it's also like we have to make sure it's like the band that just had a new album come out. They always have to play the classics at the concerts, you know, like
Yep. Oh,
they,
God.
they play some classics, they play some new music, and then they come back at the very end with like the big hit so that you stay the whole time.
God,
you know,
that's
like
if you go to a Green Day concert and you don't hear "Do you have the
Yeah.
time?" like
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like,
why did I even make the time?
truly, like, yeah, no, like that's a really apt comparison, and I fully like I to add on to your analogy, I can imagine that a certain amount of it is it's probably very easy to become resentful of that kind of thing, because like I remember so the school that John and I went to, the college that we went to, like they'd have every year they had two big concerts where they'd have like a name artist come in, like at the beginning, like fall semester and spring semester. They'd have one in each. Now what the fine print is that oftentimes they were a big name artist, because you know you have to afford, it's still a small college and have to be able to afford it. They have on a club's budget. So but we had for my first year there, we had Reliant K come and they did like a concert there, and they were playing all their stuff, and the whole time people were like, all right, when are they going to play Sadie Hawkins? When are they going to play Sadie Hawkins? And they were like not going to do it. And then the crowd, which I thought was a little bit rude, but the crowd was just started like chanting Sadie Hawkins, right? Like, and then they finally played it. Then you could tell they were mad about it. Like they did not want to do it. They were so like, I felt bad even because like for them, because they were so clearly upset by it. But
well, and like I mean, I luckily I haven't gotten there, but it's definitely a thing that is always like, okay, I need to make sure that is still an aspect. You know, it's like I don't run. That's not true. I don't run. I have a Pathfinder Second Edition played by post Discord, right? And so it's like I have to be a part of that. Like I run 2 Pathfinder Second Edition campaigns. Like sci-fi, unless I'm playing sci-fi, it hasn't been something that I've really gotten the opportunity to do. Like now, luckily I'm in a Star Trek campaign that just started a Wednesday, and coming up soon I'm going to be in a Western Call of Cthulhu game.
Oh shit.
Ooh,
That
that's
just
cool.
got better the more words you said. That was incredible.
yeah, no, I'm very excited about that one. Actually, both of them. I'm playing a Vulcan engineer on the Star Trek game, where I very much get to play Vulcan, which is really fun. And then I'm currently building my character for the Call of Cthulhu game, but I've got like 3 kind of like archetypes. There's like the Doctor. There is a miner who used to be the strongman at a circus, but now focuses on using his pickaxe as a melee weapon. And then the third one is a man of God. So those are the 3 archetypes that I've kind of like, I was like, I need your help to pick one because I will play all 3 of them.
Man of the cloth in that that setting is just that's so enticing.
Yeah.
Like just thinking about like having a higher being that you believe in, that you've never experienced, you've never seen, but you feel that they exist, and then coming across cosmic horror and being like, this is real because I've seen it, I have touched it, I have watched it kill, and still managing to have that emotional faith still exist, which is just like a really fun thing I think you could play off of,
Yeah.
you know?
That's
It's very compelling.
oh my god.
Yeah.
I have a question. So, like, how do you keep the feeling of dread or terror in a game with the leveling? Because when your characters level, they're getting better and more powerful, and it's getting more ridiculous the higher levels. How do you keep the feeling of dread with that?
Specifically, the way that I have interjected it with Court of Corvids is that the base story has to have an ability to scale. If it doesn't have the ability to scale, and the first issue they come across and they solve ends the problem, then there is no constant heavy horror. So the very first season of Court of Corvids, they accidentally ran into something, which is a real thing that happens here in California, where I'm from, which is an event called Bohemian Grove. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of Bohemian
I
Grove.
don't think so.
Bohemian Grove is basically where all of the richest, most powerful men go to. I think it's yearly.
Yes.
Out in the woods.
Mhm.
And they meet together, and they have a ceremony called the cremation of care, where they sacrifice and burn a casket, and it's supposed to, your cares are supposed to be inside of this, and it's supposed to allow you to spend the rest of the weekend just relaxing and having fun, because you're the most richest and powerful people, so you're heavily stressed and horrible things, so this is like the one weekend that you can like relax. The Reagans
bougiest. Oh, that's the bougiest version of Burning Man I've ever heard of.
Oh yeah, they do this in front of a giant owl statue. Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah.
Like all the Ronald Reagan was there. The Bush family go there. Obama was there. This is where the first discussions of the atomic bomb started. Like, it's wild. Like, women aren't allowed to pass a certain line because, it's a whole thing. Anyways, so in the story that we have in Court of
Lucas, that's where I'm at too. Like, just that. Whoa, okay.
It's wild, my dude. So the story of Court of Corvids is that this event happens every year in their hometown, but they were unaware of it. It was being hidden as a different event. It was being told as this like spiritual event where they all leave the forest and go to the cities, and they spend the weekend in these cities so that Mother Nature can re-heal and gather all of its all of the things that it has given us. We're giving it this weekend of rest, right? Like, that was the premise behind it. Well, this person gets kidnapped, and it's like illegal to go into the forest during this time, because then you're ruining the ceremony. Like, you're now telling the farmers that their food is no good. Like, it's this whole entire like faux pas thing, right? Well, this woman gets kidnapped and taken into the forest, and so the players went into the forest, and to find out the reason this girl was kidnapped is she was going to be the sacrifice. She was going to be the cremation of care. When they go there, they interrupt it. And when they're there, it's this entire ceremony that's happening with all of these people from all over the world that are there, all of different power levels in existence. And you interrupt this big, huge meeting. And the idea behind it, the premise is that this was every single evil that ever existed, right? And they meet here every year to have this ceremony where they can discuss amongst evil what they are allowing each other to do. And so they're like, okay, I'm going to make this attempt here. You can make this attempt here. I'm going to take this land over. And it's basically them discussing what their plans are for the year. And then good players come in and try to defeat those different things. But they're giving each other space because they're evil. They don't want to help the other person, but they'll be like, yeah, you can do that. But then I'm going to do this other thing. And so they interrupt it. And because they interrupted it, they weren't able to have this meeting. And so all of these evils that exist are just chaos. And so they're coming across lighter evils that haven't quite put their plans together. And so the idea behind it is as they're growing in level, the overarching difficulty and the overarching uh, uh, um, horror, the overarching difficulty as a whole just continuously grows. And going back to what I was saying about like them spending multiple arcs to find this item to then realize that they couldn't use it. The thing is that because they chose not to kill these people and take this item, the difficulty and the overall, like, because they didn't stop problem A, problem A is just growing and getting bigger, and the enemy is getting stronger because the whole entire thing was zombies. Like there's undead, the undead exist, and this if they get all of these pieces back together, they're going to be able to sever the connection between this great necromancer and all of their undead. Well, because they made the decision to not do that, the evil is just growing and getting bigger and bigger. And so they're over here dealing with these smaller issues. They're dealing with the symptoms and not the cause. And as they're doing that, the evil is able to spend this time getting stronger and more powerful. And because they're not really stopping them or attempting to stop the villain doesn't care about them. The villain's like, oh, there's a bug problem. Hire a pest control, get rid of them, you know? And so as they start to become more and more of a nuisance, the evil that is also growing with them has to do more and more and more to deal with them. And so like something I also view with most villains is that they're cowards. They don't want to deal with something that may take them out until they have to. And the reason they do that is because they think that if they just put enough roadblocks that it will either just work or they're going to be able to be strong enough to finally deal with the problem. And that's kind of like my mentality of it is that these individual evils are just evils that are trying to do their own thing in a world that has much bigger, badder fish. It's like dealing with guppies while there's orcas. You know what I mean? Like the orcas exist and the orcas don't give a shit about you until you start encroaching in on them, and then the orcas deal with you. And then if you start to deal with the orcas, well, then the next thing, the Kraken now deals with you, and so that's kind of how I use growth of villains, higher and higher and higher, and make it so that it is a growing thing, but also this constant slog of having to deal with the problems that they've already had, because it's like they each have their own deeper issue. Molly, who plays our sorcerer, she has a demonic blood. That is where her power comes from. Well, funny enough, the leader of hell is like, hey, you're actually someone that's important to me, and so I want you to start doing things. And so she is now also becoming a problem for the players because she wants to make Asmodeus happy, but also is trying to be a human or be a humanoid and also have friends. And so it's like I'm allowing the players to make their own difficulties in the way, which then we can spend time growing and doing and getting.
Yeah. Huh. That's really
awesome.
That is a really interesting, like, the way that you like have to set up and structure it. This is a thing that I mentioned this because it's like I'm very clearly hearing you say it, but it's also something that I'm like sort of recently coming across myself in when it comes to like planning for this kind of game, which is that it requires a lot of early setup. Like there's a lot of early stuff that you got to do like early on in the game to make sure that the rest of the game is it plays out the way that you envision, right? Not in terms of story, but at least in terms of like the scope and tone, right? Like this is something that I've been coming across in. Well, I came across it first in our home game that Freeman and I are in, where like that was a game that like everything was sort of like that was my first foray into like long-term campaign, right? And to put that into perspective, we across like 4 years, two different systems, and going like Pathfinder 1 and 5e, D&D 5e, went from level 1 to right now we're currently on hiatus, but to like 19 with most people almost 20, right? So playing that entire way through, that's a long time. And if it's your first time going into a campaign that long, I guarantee you did not put in the thought that you needed to like make the end game work out.
Absolutely.
I guarantee you that didn't happen. So that isn't it's hearing you talk about this is very interesting because it's sort of paralleling some of my own like more recent experiences, because now I do have some of that foresight, not enough to do anything about the problem, but enough to recognize the problem before it starts. And so I think that's very interesting, right? That you have to for running a game kind of with the scope and tone that you're going for, Jake, you sounds like anyway that you had to do a lot of that forethought ahead of time to really figure out how you were going to make this game that you were running work out in a way that it could go into the higher levels like that.
So what I do with my games is I start with a base, right, of like what this world is and how I want the world to be like, which is I want these players. Oh, the other thing is that I hate lore. I hate lore. Not rule of lore though.
Oh, okay, that's
cool.
good. That's good. That's good.
No, I hate other people's lore.
Mm-hmm.
Like I hate like I hate having to read novels to understand what the basis of like Tuesday is. You know, it's like I don't fucking care. And so I go into a game expecting my players to know nothing. And so I like to build worlds where they get to discover the world as I create it. Right. Yeah. And so the way that I built that world is they understood this little tiny bit that this ceremony happens, that there are these cities that they live in. It's peaceful, and the rest of the world was destroyed. And this is the only part of the world that existed. And then after they interrupted this great evil, this giant bubble basically popped around them, and they discovered that the world is much, much larger than they knew. And that, that it was an entire lie that all of these evil people put together so that they could have this safe space that they could go to and have this meeting. And so the players are literally discovering the world as they are playing. And so I do that because that's the way I like to play as a player. Is I don't want to have to read a novel to know anything. So if you're telling me and I get to experience the world and experience the lore, I love that. If you can make lore exciting to learn, I want that. So that's how I start my worlds. That's my base. And then I will give like a dozen or so storylines, and I will do at least 2 to 3 beats into all of them. Right. And then I just set them out for the players to go upon, and then let them choose. And then when they start to go in a direction, I go, okay, this is what they like, and this is the direction that they want to go. I'm going to keep going down that route, but I never forget those other 11 options. And then I go, can I bring any of those other options into the story that will make it interesting and viable and be a fun way that they remember? Oh, do you remember that one thing that happened in this episode, 15 episodes ago? Well, hey, this is now the next thing that you're going to do because you're about to accomplish this goal. Well, this other issue, well, I've already written 2 or 3 beats. Those 2 or 3 beats were for level 2, right? So you go, okay, how do I make those beats make sense at level 5, right? And then you turn around and go, okay, does it work? No. Okay, we'll go to the next one. Does this beat make sense? Yes, it does make sense. Okay, how can I interject that into a current aspect and make them remember that? Or if you have a beat that you knew that you really were excited about, like Rose, which was a character I introduced in the very first season, she has a really big overall arching story. And I'll be honest, my story has changed from when I started very much. Originally, I had this idea, and then as the players were playing through it, they gave me phenomenal ideas, and I grew as a storyteller as well, and said, this would be really great. I can pull from these other places, these other ideas, and I can just continuously add to this. But I never prevent the players from being the people that choose what direction they go. I just give them the options. So if we're getting to the end of a storyline, I look at the other 11 and I basically sprinkle hints about 2 or 3 of them and let them choose from there. And then we go on to the next branch of that storyline. And now I go, okay, now I've got 10 left. Okay, do any of these make sense? Oh, this one now makes sense. Or if I tweak this, I can use this now here. And then they go down that branch and so on and so forth. And I also think it's important to realize that storytelling as a whole, especially tabletop RPG, is never linear. A doesn't go to B, doesn't go to C, doesn't go to D, right? It A sometimes goes to F, and then you got to backtrack to B. And sometimes that works and that makes sense. And sometimes on your way to Z, you end up going to 3. You know, like for example, like I keep bringing up they're searching for these items. Well, they've discovered all of the items now, but now that they haven't gotten to Z because they haven't been able to put all these items together. So now they have to go down another branch to try and figure out another way to get to Z. And how do you get to Z by not doing the one thing that you know? Well, you go back and you discover more about where you came from.
Right.
And so that's kind of where how I write stories and how I put them together is I give my players options. I let them choose. I make sure that whatever they've chosen has a finish point, and then start working on the next one. But keeping to those core ones that I originally came up with. And of course, there are so many of those storylines that have literally been like, oh, that's fucking good. Like I will let my players come up with something and I'm like, oh, that was 100% your idea. Like,
yeah. That's interesting, because like that's interesting to hear that, because what I see, like I feel like I try to do that, right? Like that's what I try to do, but the problem that I know I run into, this has very little to do with dark campaigns, just campaigns in general, but like
fuck it. Let's go.
The issue that I have is it's an issue of momentum. Like I like to think of it as like a momentum problem, right? Where I'll start a campaign with like an idea of what I want to do with the campaign, and sometimes that is just the way my brain works. Is like I'll start out with like a very vague premise, like it's a gothic dark fantasy world, and there's probably vampires involved. My brain immediately goes to, okay, well, what are the vampires doing? And then like when I start going into like, I try to approach the campaign from the perspective of like, what are the villains trying to do? Like ignoring the players, forget about them. That's not for me to decide. What are the villains doing? And then it's a matter of like, okay, what is the point where the players intersect with what the villain is doing, where they come in and screw everything up, right? But then that's when what I like to refer to as the momentum problem comes into play, right? Because that's how I set up the campaign. And so it becomes, that is what the campaign is. And so even after that, when I start sprinkling in other, like, because that's the way the campaign started, that's the way it goes, because it is like, players I think tend to follow the path of least resistance, unless it is directly inconvenient to you, the DM, for them to follow the path of least resistance. Then they'll do something else. But but like, so that's what I often end up running across in my games, where I try really hard to set up like, okay, here is what this villain is doing. And so I guess it's less of like, I guess what I'm saying here is less like, I need to find a way of fixing this, and more just using it to illustrate. I don't know if this is true for everybody or if this is sort of just me, but for me, I require a lot of careful thought to go into the way that I set up the campaign, because if I'm trying to create like an actual like what you described, where you let your players decide the course that the campaign goes in, what often ends up happening is that if I'm trying to do that, I have to think really hard about how I'm going to set that up. Because
Sure.
if I start them on something very clear and easy to grab onto, like this is a clear story, this is the adventure, let's go, then that just is what the campaign becomes. It just is that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that like, yeah.
I think it's dependent on the GM. I mean, the thing is that the way I do things is not going to be necessarily right for every single table, and not every single GM thinks the way that I think. And I think that that's the bliss of how this industry works. Is the fact is that if every story worked exactly the same way, we would stop playing after the first time we played. Like I'm serious, you know, like and that's just how I do my stuff, right? But like, I think I like to do macro looks versus micro looks, like, right? Like you were thinking, okay, what is this villain doing right now? In my eyes, what I do is I go, what is the villain's motivation? And then while people are playing and while things are happening story-wise, I go, does it make sense for that villain to be involved here? Not necessarily would the villain be here, because the thing is that the players and the audience have no idea what's going on in your brain. And I learned this in theater, right? You do the same show in theater every single night, right? But mistakes happen regularly. I did a show. I don't know if I told you all this story or not, but I was doing a show where it was a Christmas themed show, and someone slammed one of the doors a little bit harder than they normally do, and it caused the Christmas tree to tip over, fall, and it made all the ornaments shatter all over the place, all over the floor. One of the characters that plays a maid, they came out and they started cleaning, and someone else started cleaning, and everyone just started like kept going on with the scene. And we were just like, oh my God, I can't believe that happened. Like, oh, well, oh, this is so, you know. And then people came up to me because I was in the booth, which was like at the end, at the entrance and exit of the theater. And so many people came up to me going, how did you do that Christmas tree falling effect? That was so good. Like I didn't see any ropes. I didn't like, that was so good. Oh my God. And it was just like, theater secrets. And I learned from that moment that unless you tell people this is what you're going to do, they don't know what you're going to do. And they don't know if something's a mistake or if it's on purpose. And so the thing is that I think about everything in a macro sense of like, does it make sense for does this villain or does this situation make sense to happen? Then it happens. It doesn't matter. They could have been bajillion light years away, right? But the audience, the players, don't know where you originally had them. Right. And so if it makes sense for the story and it feels good for the story, I'm going to make it happen, and I will come up with how it works for myself off screen.
Yeah.
You know, and I would go, okay, well, they were here on this situation, so I have to make it make sense. And if there's like a loophole, like, oh, you know, I very specifically said that they were traveling to this place and now they showed up. How do I change that? Or how do I make that make sense? It's like, you know, it's like, oh, well, they're tracking the ship and not the person. Their ship is going that direction, but they knew that their ship was being tracked, so that they got on a different one to make sure that they were here for this, you know, because the thing is again, the audience doesn't know.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think more often than not, I think it's less of an issue of the variety that I described. And the reality is that I just get into my own head about it. And
nothing wrong with that.
I think that
there's nothing wrong.
I think that the actual core of the momentum problem, as I described it, is just me getting into my own head. But in reality, like, the players don't know. They don't know what I had planned and what didn't have planned. Like, and so yeah, that's completely fair. Yeah,
and when a player comes up with a better you know ending to the story,
absolutely.
Guess what? It happens.
Yeah, you just abandoned it. Oh, you have so many times where like somebody will say something, like a player will just make an offhanded comment, and I'll just like sort of jokingly and be like, "That's actually a really good idea. I'm gonna do it." And then when it happens, it's like, "Oh wow, I totally called it." I'm like, "Yep." Yep, you sure did. That's yeah.
Yeah, you've
Yeah.
got me really figured out. You
That's
just
yep.
you nailed exactly what I
Okay.
had in mind
Kind of
for.
a,
Just shut my notes over here.
a last thought before we end,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but I do have a player in my home game that is the opposite of that, and it's infuriating. The
Where
player
they give you bad
No, no,
ideas.
no, no, where he figures out what my fucking
Mm,
plot twist is every time, and he always does it as like a joke, like where he's joking like, oh yeah, watch, it's gonna be this, and then he'll laugh about it because he's like, that's obviously not it, and I'm just sitting there like seething on the
Seething.
inside. Just like, and he does it every time. It's uncanny. He does it every single time, and it is infuriating. It's
so, I they haven't come out yet. Only the live
Mhm.
episode has come out, but we did the 4 episodes where we did a backstory for each of the Parliament of Owls characters. I didn't write anything
Mhm.
for any of them. I literally went in going, let's just go off the top of our heads
Yeah.
with this one and make it happen. Like, I literally was just like, no, I'm not going to write anything. I want them to come up with, like, I was like, I'm going to put them in a scenario just that it happened before today and go with it. And literally, it was just like, we were going through it, and it was like I want to say with Drax episode, he at the end afterwards, he's like, man, I did not think that that was going to happen, and I wanted to be like, me either, buddy. Me either.
Oh man, yeah. I there are many episodes of Infinite Horizon. There have been many of them where at the end of them, I'm like, I don't say anything going into the episode, but at the end, I'm like, all right, full disclosure, I came in here with like 2 words kind of as my planning. I did not have an idea of what was going to go on today. So all of that was made up on the spot. You were discovering it as I was discovering it. Not every episode, but there's quite a few where it's
Look, I will tell you, dramatic pauses are really important for me to think, well, what is really happening is fuck,
Yeah.
fuck, fuck, fuck.
Oh, I do that a lot. I do that. The thing is, but before any of you who watch Infinite Horizon go and start thinking that this is a tell, I also do it as a way to combat filler words. So like,
Oh my god, don't get me started about filler words.
Yeah.
I'm so bad about that.
me too.
We had an editor that was like, I literally cut out 3 minutes of you saying I'm like, shut up.
Oh, it hurts. It hurts. It hurts. Me too.
Oh god, no.
I do the same thing.
No, stop saying just leave silence. That's better.
Yeah. So exactly. So like before any of you who watch Infinite Horizon go thinking that you figured me out and you know when I'm making shit up at on the spot, I also use dramatic pauses to combat saying so so
You don't got him, all
yeah,
right.
you have no idea at any given time which one it's going to be. That kind of brings us to the end of tonight's episode. Jake, it's always amazing to have you here. It's so
Truly.
much fun.
I love being on here.
Yeah. We will
A
definitely
place for me to talk. Oh my god, I hate it. It's almost like I should never speak. That's how much I hate it. No.
Oh, I believe me, I understand. The easiest way to get me on your good side is be like, hey, can I interview you? Yes, please let me talk about things. I hear you. Everybody, thank you so much for tuning in, for hanging out with us tonight, for sharing your thoughts about dark campaigns and dark stories. We often when we have guests, we a little less responsive, but we do read everything that you say in the chat, and y'all always have really good, insightful things to say. So thank you so much for that. Thanks for hanging out with us. Some quick things like I promised at the beginning of the stream about the week. So on Tuesdays, at 4 p.m. Pacific time, we have Into Deep, our Waterdeep Dragon Heist actual play, where we have a whole cast of LGBTQ plus people just being chaotic. And I learned this recently, by the way. This is a fun fact about In Too Deep, is that Waterdeep Dragon Heist, if you are just doing the plot, like 5 to 8 sessions, we have just finished episode 16 of In Too Deep, and at this point, Colin has confided in me that they are so far off the rails they don't even know where the rails are anymore. So,
Lost them.
so yeah, there are elements of Waterdeep Dragon Heist in it.
I'm sure they're in Waterdeep.
They are in Waterdeep. There is at least that.
There you go.
So,
And there are dragons.
nope. Well,
To heist.
dragons in the sense of like the gold pieces, yes.
Yes.
So yeah. So anyway, that is always a fun time to go check out that chaotic crew as they run around off the rails all the time. On Wednesdays we have our at 6 p.m. Pacific time we have our sci-fi supers Cypher System game, Infinite Horizon, that IGM for. Freeman is a player in, and John writes for. So we have that. We are nearing the end of our second season, and finishing out the season with our special guest Remy Ripple. So we're it's just gonna ramp up from here. The stakes have been higher at times, but we'll see how high they get by the end of the season.
I'm just gonna.
I'm nervous.
As I mentioned before, next Friday is Ramblemancy. Again, we will be joined by Rick Budd, who many of you will know from his time GMing on various ttrpg channels of note. In particular, QueueTimes, doing Power Play. Who actually, Caitlin Bruder, is on Power Play, is also in Infinite Horizon, and is one of the senior staff here at Rule of Lore, and does a lot of our art and assets and stuff like that. So
there's so much intertwining between the two of Rule of Lore and QueueTimes, because Liv's on Dragon Heist Waterdeep. Yep. Caitlin is on Power Play. You're about to have Rick on. Drac is on Event Horizon. Yeah. Like and he's on Parliament of Owls. Mm-hmm. Like there is a lot of like crossover.
Yes, absolutely. Like the Venn diagram of Rule of Lore and QueueTimes is almost a circle. Like it's...
yeah, truly.
But yeah, so we're gonna have Rick Budd. We're gonna be talking about superheroes. It's gonna be so much fun. Excited to have Rick on here. And then of course Saturdays, I am going to be continuing my Mass Effect Legendary Edition playthrough. One of the other pieces of programming that was unlocked through our charity event. And thank you all very much for that.
I really enjoyed your announcement in Discord this week with the strike through text on.
That was
Look,
good.
I have opinions about Mass Effect 1, okay? And I try to get through it as fast as I possibly can. Anyway, every playthrough, I can't leave it out because otherwise it's an incomplete playthrough. I can't leave it out, but I get through it as fast as possible. No side quests.
So do we, JWB 1997.
Yeah, we also
love Caitlin.
Love Caitlin. And I think that's all of our programming announcements. So
yeah.
Freeman, if you wanna handle our end of stream little spiel.
Subscribe. just ways to make us
just rip the Band-Aid off right there.
Cheerful. Subscribe. I see it. I see you want to subscribe. Do it. Click. The subscribe. Subscribe.
Have any of you ever heard of a YouTuber called Leon Lush?
I feel like I've heard the name before.
So he's a commentator, but he does some of the most interesting subscribe things, which is like he just was like, go to the store, grab a jar of mayonnaise, slather your body with mayonnaise, and then go inside, go to your fridge, get some lettuce, cover yourself in lettuce, then walk around the house saying, I'm a little sandwich, and then hit that subscribe button. And you're just like, how?
Yeah. What does any of the rest of this have to do with hitting the subscribe button?
It's a bit.
I want to know. You can't end the video here. Explain this to me.
It's a bit. It's awesome. Anyway, other ways to support the channel, of course, you could get on the Patreon, become a patron. you get access to monthly monthly media recommendations, media that we've consumed or read and consumed in some way and share with you, the audience, friends. And of course, there's TT's Tabletop Tool Chest. It's our every other week skeleton narrative, a bit of narrative that we make up that we give to you, and then you can create something bigger. So like NPCs, locations, adventure hooks. And then of course, at the end of the month is World Builders, where you come together at the end of the month and you create things in the Infinite Horizon universe, which is super cool.
Many of which have actually served like pretty significant roles on the show. So yeah, a lot of that stuff gets used, and even if it doesn't get used like on the show, it definitely like informs a lot of background stuff. Like it gets shared with the players and they use it in their own backstories and things like that. So like yeah.
Every time I see that call, I'm like, oh, things are happening.
Yeah.
Of course, get on the merch store, grab yourself a cup. Why is my phone in there? Grab yourself a cup.
That way you don't lose it.
That's true. It's the new cell phone case cup combo.
And multifunctional.
Yeah.
And also,
Hold the key,
t-shirts are
hold yourself.
back.
Yeah.
That's an important thing. T-shirts are back. Not this exact t-shirt that I have. This has got a little weird. This is also just the fabric coming undone for some reason.
It's
When you're
Great
cryptid-
sell.
it's 'cause-
Great
when
sell
you're-
on the
Because
shirt.
Freeman's beard is actually made of copper wire, and so when he turns his
when
head,
you're-
it just
When you're a cryptid,
no, but
It's-
they're
clothing's hard.
yeah, but they are same art, new shirts. Basically, is what
Yeah.
we're saying. Same art, new shirts.
I derailed myself. Anyway, so you can also jump. There's also coffee. You can check out the coffee. If you liked seeing our talk show here, this will be on YouTube Monday morning.
Yeah.
And thank you, Nightbot, for plugging the Discord, which is the best way to be in touch about any announcements that we make. It's a great way to get a whole bunch, just a chorus of good morning and good zones every single time you wake up. It's my favorite thing about general chat in our Discord. You can keep up to date on live reactions to all of our shows, react yourself in any of our many chat channels about them, share memes, talk about tabletop RPGs, all that good stuff. So, and sometimes you'll find us or others hanging out there in the evenings, playing games or pretending to play games. It's a good time. Join the Discord.
Always
Not-
join the Discord.
Not Discord.
Every
Discord.
time. Jake, tell everyone who might not know already where they can find you.
Oh God. So you can find me on Twitter at IndigoQT, or you can follow QueueTimes, which is the channel in which I run, which does primarily tabletop RPG stuff, at _QueueTimes on Twitter. We also have a Discord, which who doesn't? Like honestly, how many of us have like 40 Discords that like 90 of them are muted? Anyways.
Yeah.
Don't look at me. Don't look at me.
we all do
Just-
it. It's okay.
Just light me up, Jake. Just
It's okay. Look, I'm calling out everyone, all right, because we all do it. You can go there and hang out with us there. We also have a Patreon. I'm currently on I'm currently only on one show. We are coming back with Parliament of Owls fairly soon as I finish editing the one shots. But we have a bunch of stuff from Star Trek to Alien to World of Darkness. They're about to do their final season of the World of Darkness New York stuff, where they went through vampire, werewolf, wraith, mage. They went through all of the World of Darkness series, the same cast, play different characters, and then their final season, which is going to be 10 episodes, they're picking their favorites, and all of them are coming back. So each player will be playing. There might be a vampire, werewolf, a wraith, and a mage. We don't, like it's going to be some combination of that. And B. Dave Walters actually runs that game, and it is a phenomenal crew. Most of the crew is from Bard and Barbarian, which is the Western Call of Cthulhu game that I'll be on starting July 1st. I think I'm allowed to announce that. If not, if you don't see me on there July 1st, I did something wrong. But yeah, there's 1,000 more places you can find me. But really, honestly, just go to one of those two, and we'll make it up from there.
Heck yeah! All right. Well, as always, Jake, it was awesome to have you. So hopefully we will see you all tomorrow at 6 p.m. Pacific time right here for me playing some Mass Effect. And enjoying my time playing Mass Effect 1. But if not, we will see you the next time you decide to come roll with us. Good night and good zone, everybody.